Hi, Virginia. It's nice to see you. Where are you joining from?
Hi, Nina. Good afternoon. I'm joining you from Austin, Texas.
Nice. Well, thank you again for being part of the Public Digital Fund and your butterflies and the honeymoon. And thank you for your time for these questions. So I think we can start with just, the way I usually start studio visit. Just tell me a little bit about your education and your first steps in the arts.
Absolutely. So my education is one that kind of came about through an early interest in arts and sciences. I'm a born and raised Texan. I'm from Houston originally. I studied with my undergraduate degree at the University of Texas in Austin, where I did a lot of linguistics. So from the get-go, I was always very interested in social sciences, symbols, psychology, how meaning operates, and how people approach different archetypes. And through my undergrad experiences in a big liberal arts school, I eventually found my way into the art program. And from there, I got really enamored with video art and performance art. I did classes with Mike Smith, who's a very idiosyncratic, famous performance artist who teaches there. So my entryway into the arts did not come through like a traditional painting and drawing way, like a lot of artists, but purely through experimental new genres.
So you arrived there. Was art did it play a big role when you were when you were a child? Was it something that, how some children are tuned to art? Were you like this in the beginning, or it came kind of gradually over time for you?
Yeah, I think I was always a really creative child. I was really interested in inventive worlds and world building. I was also one of those kids that was really interested in the physicality of forms. So I used to like pull things apart to see how they fit together, like pulling apart the alarm clock.
Oh, wow.
And,
Right.
Yeah, I did a lot of that. And, continuing onward with my education, I moved to New York City in 2008 after I finished school. And I lived and worked in New York consistently from 2008 to 2019. And 2019. And within that time period, I also went to Yale and received my MFA in sculpture and video art. So I'd say my course of being an artist has been a combination of like new media explorations, but also spending a lot of time working and traveling around different parts of the United States throughout that time. So all these different influences go into kind of the ranging topics that I cover in my art.
Yes, and it's also interesting. So when you describe your art as a research practice of feminist metaphysics, as a curator who works a lot with female artists, it was interesting for me to read this, the way you describe your practice. So can you tell me where this trend of feminism, or I don't know, would you call yourself ecofeminist? Where do you see yourself in this larger umbrella term of feminist art?
Yeah, exactly. So, in terms of feminism, I very much so am interested in kind of the expanded intersectional definition of feminism, which takes up considerations of class and socioeconomic status, labor, in addition to just gender identification. And I mention that because so much of the subtext of my artwork is about labor and working. And when it comes to my video artworks like Butterfly Birthbed and Honeymoon,
sure,
I'm not only performing in front of the camera, like those are my own hands that you see in the work, but I'm doing all that work behind the camera. And I'm very interested in what does it mean as women when we do all of this work and labor and it goes societally unrecognized and underacknowledged. So that's an aspect of feminism I really identify with. And then the physical term that exists is acknowledging the contemporary analytical, metaphysical, philosophical practice of investigating aspects of being, nature, time, these very kind of base elements of how we define reality. So I am very much so interested in beautiful, ephemeral qualities of time, nature, and being, but doing so intentionally from a feminist lens where I'm aware of society's
Right.
objectification of my own physical body as a woman in this world. So,
And
yeah.
and it's also interesting when you describe
And then
yourself.
as far as
Go ahead.
ecofeminism, I'm
Go.
happy to.
So as
Oh,
far
oh, sorry. I think the connection had us overlapping. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. No, I
Go
wanted
ahead.
to catch what you said about ecofeminism. The last part about the ecofeminism that you were saying something, and I don't think I caught that.
Yes. So I do identify as an ecofeminist, and specifically from a metaphysical panpsychic perspective. There is a branch of ecofeminism that Donna Haraway has been writing about
Right.
since the
Yes.
1980s, where she talks about it's very important for feminism to also include the non-human entities, whether they be animals, plants. She goes so
Right.
far as to hypothesize like machines in her cyborg manifesto, but
Right.
we should expand the definition to also attribute consciousness to these other elements, artifacts, things in the world as
Beings.
a way of
Yes.
yeah, like as a way of expanding the lens that oftentimes male patriarchy has a hard time understanding, that we women are actually conscious beings ourselves.
Right.
So a lot of that dialogue is like, if we help shift the conversation to recognize an animist agency within all things, it will help elevate the quality of life for not only women, but also for trees, plants, waterways, and their protection. Right. So, so I'm interested in this kind of animist interpretation of feminism, which maybe from the outside might seem too fantastical, but again, it's about an intentional subversive act to expand consciousness to help us take better care of the earth, in addition to human rights.
No, I think it's very interesting also, and I've countered that in other artists that I've met over years. This idea, I wouldn't say, maybe you wouldn't call it neo-paganism, but this idea of returning power to the powers of nature, and somehow it was stripped because of this traditional Christianic ideals, right, for so many centuries. And now we're kind of backtracking. And I think it's very interesting and important to see it in the contemporary art. This is a strong strand, and it's very empowering, I think, for every woman also to see it. Yeah.
I agree. I think so much of the Western world takes for granted that a lot of these power systems that came over from the Christianization of Europe are actually very recent. But if you look at, I'm specifically thinking about this in context to a Western lens, because that's the culture I was
of course
within.
Yes, I mean, yeah, we share that. So
exactly. But I just think of like my Celtic ancestors from Scotland. There wasn't a veneration of trees and rocks, and a lot of that was lost. And now I feel it's starting to come back. So I think it is inspiring and empowering.
Right. Virginia, can you tell me a little bit about the symbolism? And I know that it plays important role in your video works. I mean, first of all, let's talk a little bit about your video works. I mean, with this, the fund is engaged with your 2 videos, but can you talk a little bit more about your video practice, your practice as video artist? How does it fit within your overall kind of, as you see yourself as an artist? The practicing artist.
Right. So as a video artist, I'm incredibly interested in both the conceptual ideas that go into the formation of work, but also the physical process, the labor, what actually happens that makes that work come manifest. And so my style of video art making is a bit like being a mad scientist witch, where I set up these like very surreal environments like a scientist does, but then I'm kind of looking at them through this like magical lens to see what beautiful, fantastic, ephemeral, surreal moments can happen. Right. And so video art making for me is, it's a very time intensive process. So for example, with the butterfly birth bed video, I was able to find local native butterflies, have them lay eggs, raise these little caterpillars,
Right.
they turn into butterflies. So a lot of that film is watching the real-time emergence of butterflies from their chrysalises
Right.
on a small butterfly scale bed that I created in a small prop environment and filmed. And
Right.
so it's a very, very immersive, intense video art process. It's kind of like BBC Planet Earth, but in
In
this
a
very,
way, it is. It has that aesthetic in a little bit. Right.
it's, obviously it's art, it's about dreams, it's
Of
about
course.
something that isn't as functional as like a documentary to educate children about glaciers. It
Right.
exists in that space beyond, but that's a lot of my process, is just really setting up these strange worlds and then
Hmm.
capturing those moments from them.
And how does it fit within the symbolism? Like, for example, when you think about butterflies, it's traditionally like this whole transformation of a butterfly, right? The stages,
Yeah,
it's kind of is such a loaded metaphor. So,
it's very,
yeah,
yeah,
please.
it is very loaded. I agree. And, that's part of the desire to interact with it, because I think these cliche loaded metaphors still have a lot of power, even though they are so omnipresent
Of
within
course,
culture.
that's why
Also,
they're there in the first place, right?
it,
That's why they're so powerful.
absolutely, it's why they're powerful. Also, however, most people, when they think of a butterfly, they think of, the beautiful, fully formed
Right.
winged creature. They don't actually know or remember that it is an insect, and insects can be a bit, they can be a bit gross. And
Right.
so within the film, when you're watching the little butterfly hatch, I mean, there are these kind of like crunchy noises. At times it's,
Right.
it's a little like, ooh, I
Crackly.
don't know.
Right.
But I like those moments where
Right.
you start to realize that these things in life that we assume are so beautiful and magical are actually of the earth, or are viscous, have fluids. There's a scene in the film, I think, when a newly hatched butterfly immediately starts like ejecting fluid, and it's kind of gross, but I
Right.
like those moments. And as far as the symbolism of the butterfly, I mean, I did a lot of deep research in terms of how it functions as a symbol in
Right.
Western mythology. I love this idea of the Grecian myth of Psyche, and she
Hmm.
was this Grecian figure that was represented as the butterfly winged goddess, and she was the embodiment of transformation. Because in the Greek myth of Psyche, I think she has to go into the underworld, and that's a bit like the butterfly going into the
Right.
chrysalis.
Changing. Yes. Through this. Yeah.
And so for a while now in my art, I've been really honing in on moths and butterflies, which I
Hmm.
should also say, in English, we have two different words for moth and butterfly, but I
Right.
know in other languages, they're just one word. So, and they're
Right.
really scientifically very close species. But anyway, Psyche, um, the English word for psychology actually is a reference to Psyche, this butterfly winged goddess. So I love the idea that when you think about all the evolutions within the field of psychology, and how, many psychologists just think art is a expression of the human subconscious. And
Right.
so I think Psyche is like the meta archetype of artistic, surreal, subconscious dream world expression.
That's a beautiful kind of definition. It's very nuanced too, and also the surrealism. I think it's very interesting to see how this whole kind of movement is coming back. This idea, right? And I was really not surprised, but it was interesting to read this the concept for the next Venice Biennale that's also centered around surrealism, and it seems like this is something in there. Maybe it has something to do with the whole 2020, how surreal it was, how kind of how it changed our perception of reality in each given instance, right? Like our public reality, our kind of shared in our private lives. So maybe what do you think about it? Why do you think surrealism has having kind of a return right now? As an artist who is also kind of working with the same
Yeah,
metaphors and the
I know
language.
for me, thank you. Yeah, for me, it's exciting. It's also, for me as an artist, it's a bit strange when the thing that I obsess about suddenly becomes like more culturally interesting.
Yes, right.
It feels good. But I agree, yes, with what you said, that we're living in a time that now feels more unreal than real. And I think
Right.
that is a result of climate change, with having these ecologic disasters that we can't
And
control.
man-made disasters, so many. Yes, right.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, so many are
right.
man-made disasters. And I think it's also partly living in an era of rising economic disparity. A lot of people on an economic level don't feel like they have control over society or their
Right.
participation. And so I think then the function of dreams becomes not only a place of escapism, but also a place where you can role play and start to construct a new world where you have agency and there's new possibilities.
Yeah.
And for me, I think that's why surrealism is having this cultural moment, because people are understanding that, dreams are not just like fodder, fantasy. They actually are
Right.
tools. They're tools for
Sure.
change.
Right.
So when people start dreaming of a new world, it's important. And I have to also say, I love that the new Venice Biennale is focused on Leonora Carrington, because she's an
Yes.
artist
Yes.
that
Right.
I deeply admire. And she's someone that, was born in England, lived in New York for a while, moved to Mexico City. And so I myself feel a connection with her own narrative of someone that moved around different
Right.
places in the world, but always was participating in this subterranean culture, but also cared a lot about feminism and
Mm-hmm.
being a part of other women artist groups. And, she used to play Exquisite Corpse with Frida Kahlo and hang out.
Yes, which is
And
stunning.
I love that entire community that she also was a part of. So I find it very inspiring that, you can be a woman making art that's in context to your own complex psyche, but also do so in a way that is about exchanging ideas and sharing dreams with other people too.
Yes, and at the same time, also connecting to, of course, connecting to this large heritage of feminists, like you that you mentioned, right? Whom you mentioned, like Frida and Carrington and so many others, and it's like such a honorable lineage to be part of, and it's great to see.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, I'm so grateful that you invited me to display my videos in Moscow with the art
I
class.
wanted to ask, how do you feel about it? Because as you know, they are screening on 12 plus screens at the moment. And it's
Amazing.
really amazing to see from New York and from Texas, and just seeing it as part of Moscow everyday landscape. It's very exciting for me as a curator, and thank you for being part of that.
Oh, of course. I'm so happy. I mean, it's these moments that make me feel with so much joy that think that art can actually transcend like region
And
and
limitations and all the politics and all. I think that's the beauty of art for me, because before I moved into art, I was in international relations and diplomacy, but then I realized that art can be so much more effective with the power of image, and can transcend so many more boundaries in a very immediate, very emotional, in a very instantaneous connection that takes years to negotiate with politics. So I'm really, this is a different way of bridging the divide. Have you ever been to Moscow yourself? I'm just curious.
No, I haven't. I would love to go. I mean, it looks fascinating. It's just, it's a joy to see the videos not only operating on the big screens, but also to see the bodies, the people walking in everyday life in Moscow in context. And it's deeply flattering for me to have the work there. So I'm just so grateful for the opportunity. I mean, those little butterflies, I raised them here, and now it's like they're flying.
They're flying all over the world. Can you tell me a little bit about Honeymoon? Because I don't think we touched on it that much. So what was the idea there? Because it's also, it's a very, very interesting and striking image. So tell me a little bit more where it comes from.
Yeah, so the work Honeymoon was one that I initially wanted to create as a way of grasping the intangible moon itself, because again, thinking about symbolism and how signs and symbols exist around us in everyday life, what we can actually access like touch in a physical way versus what always exists as an image. And I was fascinated by this concept that the moon really exists for us as an image, because we can't touch it with our hands.
Yeah, right.
And so, but yet we know it's not an image. We know it's a real rock in the sky, but it really functions the same way as an image. And so I was like, okay, what if I actually touch the moon? So I made a small 3D print model of the moon, and then put a LED light inside. And because again, all my video art it's made with real things. There's no computer graphics. It's all like
That's
real.
why they feel so kind of, you know, multidimensional, because you see that it's not manipulated. I mean, it is
No, it's
manipulated, but in a different, yeah, not digitally. So yeah.
exactly. Yeah. So I held this little moon in my hand against the black background. And then my other hand above it had honey. And then I was squeezing the honey over the moon. And the video is just kind of like this beautiful, quiet dripping of the honey on the moon. And, you know, it was a bit of a linguistic joke because in English, you know, honeymoon is supposed to be this idealistic phase and the new
blissful phase. Yes. Right.
And again, from a feminist perspective, I kind of wanted to critique that terminology since, you know, most of us know relationships are inherently complex. And so a way of kind of critiquing this, I don't know, I want to say this like kind of idealized marketing honeymoon term.
Absolutely. And when you think about it, for how many women, especially like when they were kind of silenced, honeymoons were not at all honeymoons, you know, and in so many, like in the past, right, and throughout histories.
Oh yeah, exactly, exactly.
So
so there's an element of the video, that honeymoon, that is both like very soothing, healing, but also like a tiny bit sinister,
subversive. It is a little subversive. Yes, I felt that. And just also, I mean, as I mentioned in in our conversation, so part of this, our mission of showing this video is also kind of looking and presenting video work in public spaces. How do you think about your video as public art? Have you ever thought about it in this way? Or is it something that just came with this specific, or I mean, just curious to hear your comment.
With honeymoon specifically, I did design.
It was part of the Times Square, of course. Yes,
yeah, I wanted to. Well, you know, thinking about busy city spaces that have all this advertising content and cars moving around, lots of motion. And I thought, okay, what if I did a philosophical experiment in negation, which is to present the opposite of something. So I introduced the video artwork that's like very quiet and calm and soothing inside a context which is about commerce and market and moving. So that was part of it. And again, it kind of speaks to my desire to be like a little bit like a scientist and think
it's very self-contained. Like this whole video is very self-contained. In a way, it's insular, right? It creates in its own space. So it's I think.
Yeah, so it's kind of introducing a symbol into a space and then seeing how it resonates. But I love seeing it, like the image of the honeymoon video playing across the city. There's something about the scale shift that's really interesting. And there's a couple of documentation images that you very generously shared with me where you can actually see the real moon in the sky.
I think it's
and I love those moments because it's again speaking to, I don't know, thinking about how art can function on a global level, but I think oftentimes the moon feels so localized to us, like wherever we are in our moment, that we sometimes forget it's the same moon as in Mexico or China.
Or it's everywhere. Yeah, it's not this kind of, it shifts. But
I love that because I feel like I have a very personal relationship with the moon, but in a sense I don't, because it's like the community
right moon. It's a communal good. We'll share.
Yes, exactly. We're all sharing it. So.
Virginia, just to finish up, what are your future plans? What's the next thing that's coming up for you?
Yeah, so currently I'm working on another video that includes a beautiful winged creature. It's the bright green Luna moth, which is very on theme with the moon, since it is a moth that is so iconic with that. And that video will be playing this fall at the Contemporary Art Museum in Austin, Texas.
Wonderful.
So yeah, that's what's coming up on the horizon for me.
Great. Virginia, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, and thank you for being part of the fund. And yeah, good luck with everything. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful to be a part of it. Thank you.
Thank you.